Welcome to the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast with TJ and Sonny.
Hello and welcome to the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast. We were on a temporary break there so that we could get through our conferences and camp seasons, and we are coming back swinging. Today I have a special co-host, somebody joining us for the first time, but someone who's not a first-timer to youth ministry at all. This is a pretty exciting moment for the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast. We have hosting with me today the one and only Mr. Mark Ostriker, aka MarkO. Mark, how you doing?
I'm good, man.
Yeah?
I'm just impressed you said my name correct.
Did I say it right? Oh man, you know what? I was talking to Justin Herman beforehand just so I could say that thing right. So you can thank him for that later. So we have an awesome show, but before we want to do that, we kind of want to intro who MarkO is. If you've been living inside of a rock and you haven't seen what MarkO's been doing in the youth ministry community, we want to kind of do that. MarkO, how long have you been in youth ministry?
38 years, I think. Something like that. Longer than many listeners have been alive, that's for sure.
That's longer than I've been alive, MarkO, so you beat me.
A long time for sure. I'm getting up there. There's definitely living generations of youth workers who are older than me, but especially because I've really spent my whole life doing junior high ministry. So I'm really an old guy in junior high ministry.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
How do you hang in there in junior high ministry for that long? What is the secret? What's the magic sauce?
I just love kids. I don't know.
That's a good answer.
That's the bottom line. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other answers I could give in terms of, creating intentional, healthy rhythms in my life and different things like that. But I just love junior hires. And the more that years pass, the more I love them, right? It's like I'm that much more confident about the need for junior high ministry to be great because it's just so critical. So, I spent, the first half of my youth ministry career as a full-time youth pastor, primarily with junior hires. And then for 20 years now, I've been a volunteer at my church because back in 98, I came to San Diego to work for Youth Specialties. And then 10 years ago, that shifted and I started the Youth Cartel. So I've been, that whole time here, I've been a volunteer in my church's junior high ministry. So this is my 20th. Actually, I think I'm about to begin my 21st year as a volunteer at my church.
That's crazy.
So it's great. I'm like these days in our ministry, I'm a small group leader. I'll have 8th grade boys this year, and I had the same kids last year as 7th graders. Then I also kind of coach the various youth pastors at my church and do some other stuff like that. Often I'm the one called on to do a training of our volunteer team and stuff like that. Yeah.
MarkO, you got something big coming up here called the Camfrance. You want to let our listeners know what that's all about?
The Youth Cartel doesn't do too many events these days, but we still do a couple of them. We actually have 2 Camfrances. And a Camfrance, by the way, if you haven't ever heard the word before, we kind of made it up, but turns out other people have used it too. So a Camfrance is a cross between a conference and a camp, right? So it's a youth ministry training event, but set at a camp. And that creates a real unique context that makes it really different than other youth ministry events because we're not all running back to our hotels. We're not all running off to find meals. We're all there together for the whole time. Including all the speakers. They're not even allowed to come unless they're willing to stay for the entire event. So the first one in October, early October, I think it's 4 to 6, is the Middle School Ministry Camfrance. And it's just a little boutique youth ministry event. We usually have about 120 people there. And it's just for people who like junior hires. And it's a blast. Kind of the who's who of junior high ministry are there. So Brooklyn Lindsay and Kurt Johnston and Scott Rubin and Katie Edwards and Ashley and Chef from Orange and Kenny and Elle from Stuff You Can Use and all of those people are part of our speaking team, but they're also there the whole weekend. So there's seminars and main sessions, but you're also having lunch with those people, and you're hanging out during free time with those people, right? So it's pretty cool. Yeah, that one, people can check it out. Just go to campference.com and it'll take you to that website. Then the other conference, I don't think you even realize we're doing, but it's in January, and it's called the Multi-Site Church or the Multi-Site Youth Ministry Conference. And that's the same kind of an event, again, around 100, 150 people, and it's just targeting youth workers who are in a multi-site church context. We did this one a year ago, and we're now repeating it in partnership. The first one has a bunch of partners, but the lead partner is CIY. And the second one, our lead partner is Orange. So, and that one's in Atlanta in January. Yeah.
Awesome. Those sound like exciting and really, really helpful things for our listeners to be a part of. And I know that those would be beneficial. So check those out. It's campference.com. Again, I'm going to say that one more time, campference.com. All right, MarkO, I am done with the intro chit chat. So let's get to the show.
We are still listening to the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast.
Question of the week. It is question of the week time here. This is just a question that's sometimes sent in by people. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we come up with it. The question I have this week is this: what is something that happened in your childhood that affects how you do youth work today? So something that happened in your childhood that affects how you do youth work today. Now, I think a lot of what happens in your childhood, especially when you're talking about youth, but something you can like pinpoint, this happened and I do youth work this way.
It's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind when you ask me that is I think of 3 people who played a pretty big impact on me. And the first of these occurred, I think, can I include like my teenage years as part of childhood?
Yes,
Beautiful.
absolutely.
So the first one happened when I was in 7th grade. And this was back, I'm 56. So back when I was a junior higher, back in the dark ages, my church I don't think anybody had ever heard of a junior high pastor. It was a good sized church, but the youth group was just the high school, right? And so even though our church had a youth pastor, I was not yet in the youth group. But that guy, his name was Terry, he stopped me in the hallway of our church one day, and he was my 2 older sisters were in his youth group. So he knew who I was, but I didn't know I was on his radar at all. He stopped me in the hallway, like during passing time between church and Sunday school or something, right? Put his hand on my shoulder and stopped me. And I thought I was in trouble, which would have been very possible. And he looked me right in the eyes and he said, "Oh, Stryker, you'd be a great youth pastor one day." That was the whole thing. That was exactly the wording. And then he let go of me and he walked on, and I stood there. And here's the interesting thing, TJ. I can completely in my mind recreate every exact detail of that spot. Like, I know exactly what the curve of the hallway was. I know what the curtains right there looked like. I know I was just coming out of the kind of Christian ed wing, and up ahead of me was the bathrooms on the right side and the custodian's office, and then the fellowship hall. Courtyard was on the left. I mean, every detail of that exact spot is completely burned into my memory. And I haven't seen that place in, 40 plus years, because that building got sold and leveled, and the church moved. The church still exists, but it moved, and it's now condos and a strip mall. So it doesn't exist anywhere except for in my brain. But man, I know it exactly because it had such a profound impact on me. And so that really today still impacts like how I do ministry, particularly with junior hires, but it would apply to kids of all ages, right? And I think with junior hires, particularly, you're just starting to see some of the possibilities of capacities and character and things like that. And when we call that out in kids, it's almost always prior to them being aware of it, right? I had no idea that I would be a good youth pastor. It wasn't even remotely on my radar at that time. And I would think there's a pretty high likelihood that a major portion of why I'm in youth ministry today is because of those like 6 or 7 words in that hallway, right? So it just had a huge impact. Yeah, and then I guess I would probably add that as a junior and senior in high school, 2 people gave me lots of opportunity to try out leadership. One was my church youth pastor, and one was our church choir director. And both of those gave me platform. Man, they gave me, in the new Growing Young research out of Fuller Youth Institute, they talk about keychain leadership and how churches that actually do well with young people give the keys, and they don't just mean literally, they mean give authority and responsibility and meaning to young people. And that's what both of those people did for me. They gave me opportunity and a long enough leash to fail and support when I did, but they were honest with me when I did also. And yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely in ministry today because of those 2 people, Jerry and Steve.
Huge.
I love the statement of calling it out in students and just looking at a student and looking at their heart, looking at their soul, looking at what they are and saying, I think you'd be good at this. And I think that, a lot of times, especially junior hires, go through life with adults sort of interacting with them in a kind of go do this, go do that kind of way. But to actually look and kind of dream for them is such a healthy discipline. It's something that it could be mind-blowing. And I had a similar experience. My youth pastor, I told him I wanted to be a youth pastor, and he, took it upon himself to try to convince me not to be a youth pastor.
The salary sucks and people are mean to you.
Yeah, well, and he said, I'll meet with you every Wednesday at 6 a.m. And I'm not a morning person, never ever going to be a morning person. But I met with him every Wednesday at 6 a.m. And he said, if by the end of it you still want to be a youth pastor, you're probably called to be a youth pastor. And it happened that way. But his was kind of the negative of that, but also it was that idea of, if you want this, I'm gonna help you get there. I'm gonna help you get to that place.
A reminder on this to those listening: this is not just about calling out potential vocation, right? Because for most of the kids, especially if they're younger, the more profound impact will be to call out character that you see rather than a potential job, right?
Yeah, huge.
And I would say that even in that youth pastor calling me out at that point, he wasn't really just naming a possible vocation. He was saying something about my skills and creativity and character that he saw, right? And that's what I try to practice with the kids in my own youth group, right? Is to, even the squirrely ones, man, maybe it's even more important with them. Right now, I have one of the easiest small groups I've ever had. I've had some really hard ones. And this one's pretty easy. I only have 6 boys in it, and I have 2 co-leaders. I mean, it's just like a dream, right? There's 3 adults and 6 boys, and 4 of the boys are really easy. And there's 2 that are a challenge, right? But I still find that, man, it's so important for me to find things about those squirrelier guys that I can call out, that I can name as, as just a skill or a character, right? I'm trying to call out competencies. I'm identifying and nurturing competencies.
Join the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. And when you subscribe to this podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating. We desperately need your approval.
All right, Tales from the Fringe, Tales from the Fringe. This is just good old-fashioned storytelling segment where we look into our lives and our ministry lives, and we think about fringe youth, students that have come along the way who have been on the fringes of society and not your typical kid. And we just say, what's a story that you have about that? What's a story that you have about working with a fringe kid, or maybe in your past, if you consider yourself to be a fringe kid, something that happened in your childhood or youth or something along those lines. So that is what this is, Tales from the Fringe. I'll go first to give you a second to kind of think of your tale from the fringe, and I'll just kind of tell mine real quick here, Marco. So when I got saved when I was 16 years old at a church camp, and didn't come from a Christian family really at all. We were kind of Catholic when we wanted to be, Easter and Christmas, and just big Irish family. And I got saved, and then at the same time, one of the people who was going to be my best friend also got saved at a completely different camp, and we kind of just found each other in high school. And his name was Adam, and Adam was so incredibly cool back in the late 90s, early 2000s. He was punk rock. He had the black leather jacket that had the cut off sleeves and the studded things, and then a message on the back that he had paper clipped to the back of his jacket, and he had a mohawk, a huge mohawk, with each just individual point going this way. And he played the guitar, not well, but he did play the guitar.
You don't need to play it well for punk rock, man.
Exactly. And he knew how to play those bar chords for sure, man. And I remember me and him, we just found each other, and we just started like this awesome relationship of discipleship and just kind of iron sharpening iron, to be cliche there for a second. But we were on our way to a Bible study, and Adam drove a 1978 Cutlass Supreme that was primer gray. That's what it looked like, and it sounded like the opposite of what a Prius is. This is what this car is, and a cop sees us, and he's not even in a car. He's like on the side of the road, and he just stopped somebody else, and he sees us go by, right? And I'm just like this kind of messy looking kid with a hoodie on, kind of skater kind of look to me. And then of course Adam and his punk rock scene in this just terrible car, and he just motions for us to pull over, right? Just like, no, something's going on here, right? That's his whole thing right now. And he comes up and he starts talking to Adam, and he's talking in a really aggressive way. And he's like, "What are you guys up to? What are you doing right now?" And we're like, "We're actually on our way to a Bible study." And he laughs. He just straight laughs at us, right? And we're, we actually have our Bibles right there. He doesn't see that our Bibles are right there. And he starts looking at him. He says, "Show me your hands. Hey, show me your hands. Show me your hands." And I'm getting kind of scared. And I'm like, "Adam, show him your hands." I look over him, and I realize he's not talking to Adam. He's talking to me through Adam's window. And my hands are just kind of on my side, and I kind of open them up, and I kind of hold them up, palms up to him, like, "I don't have anything." And he comes whipping around the other thing, opens up the Cutlass Supreme. I'm sure like some McDonald's wrappers came out and some other stuff came out, and he starts just like digging under the seat, like, while I'm there. And he's like, "What do you got? Do you got a bong under here? Is there a bong? Am I going to find a bong under here? You got a pipe? What do you have?" And he's just kind of like going off. And I'm like, I don't know Adam all that well at this point. Maybe he has a bong, maybe he has a pipe. I'm like, what's going on? And he kind of rustles around there, and he grabs like this thing, and he kind of finds a piece of metal, and he pulls it out thinking he's got something. And I can see his eyes light up, and he pulls out this empty, like smashed up pop can, right? And I'm like, "No, that's a pop can." And then he looks over and he sees our Bibles stacked on the center column right there together. And he looks at both of us and he goes, Are you boys really going to a Bible study right now?" And we're like, yeah, we're really going to a Bible study right now. And he turns around, he just realizes, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. I just figured, I'm out here all alone." And he kind of gives us his life story about, like what he's doing out there. And, we leave on our way to that thing. And I remember thinking like, this, and leaving that scene thinking, well, first of all, it's a story on stereotyping and all that stuff, but I want to do youth ministry for people like Adam. Like I want my youth ministry to be filled with Adams, in different forms and different things. And I want our youth ministry to be people who don't have everything on the outside figured out, but God is doing something amazing on the inside. And I think to this day, that's something that's affected me. And so that's my tale from the Fringe this week.
Well, mine is more of when I was an adult working with kids. So the 4 churches where I was employed over a bunch of years as a youth pastor were all fairly normal suburban crowds. Of course, because they were bigger ministries, we had a variety of, fringe kids of various types. But the real shock to me was after doing youth ministry for 20 years, when I came to the church that I'm at right now, where I attend and volunteer, and started being involved in the junior high ministry. And pretty early on, the junior high pastor left, and I became the interim for a little bit. And the church is, especially at that time, it's not quite as much this way anymore, but at that time it was almost all filled with adults who came to Christ as adults. Most of them through the ministry of this church. Yeah. And the result was something I'd never experienced in youth ministry, which was that all of these kids of theirs, that in this case junior hires, they were all brought to church by their newly converted parents and didn't want to be there. In fact, Christianity had messed up their family system, right? It might have been a dysfunctional family before. Mom and dad might have been drinking or all kinds of stuff, and now they were on the straight and narrow, but everything was, in place and understood, that family system. And suddenly it was disrupted, and we had tons. We had 100 junior hires there on a Sunday morning, and the majority of them were not Christian kids who were bothered about being there and frustrated that their family now went to church. And as a result, we also found that they knew absolutely nothing about the Bible. I mean, nothing. This is not the Bible Belt. I live in San Diego, right? So it'd be similar for you in Seattle there. I remember the moment this really struck me. I was teaching Sunday morning in our group, and I was teaching, and I referenced the story of Zacchaeus. And there was about 100 kids there, and I was getting blank stares, and I could tell something's wrong. And, if you have a group of normal youth group kids who grew up in church, of course they've heard Zacchaeus 100 times as little kids. It's a classic children's Sunday school story, right? And I mentioned it in passing, and I just got all these blank stares. And on a hunch, I said, how many of you have ever heard of the story of Zacchaeus? And 3 kids out of 100 raised their hands. It was crazy. And I stood there, not sure what to do. I was so caught off guard by it. And I said, can anybody even tell us what that story's about? And this was not in my teaching plan to take time to do this. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I adjust right here? Do I tell the whole story? And one of the girls, who happened to be our fairly new teaching pastor's daughter, she sighs really heavily. She was one of the few kids who grew up in church. She sighs really heavily and raises her hand in the most pathetic, passive-aggressive, I'm gonna help you out. I don't want to answer, but I can tell you're dying up there, so I'm gonna help you out. And I called on her in desperation, Bethany, yes, I'm calling on you. And she gave a little summary, right? But it was a real awakening to me not to make a bunch of assumptions about what kids know and what they don't. Even if I'm up there teaching a Bible story, not to assume that they've ever heard it or have any context for what it would mean. And I still find that today, in my small group of my guys, I was finding such a significant lack of any context of the Bible or understanding. I kind of got the impression that they had gotten the sense that God loves me and Jesus wants me to thrive. I don't think they would use that word, right? They had that message, but they didn't have much beyond that. And so last year, in my small group, we just did our own thing, and I got a list of the 32 most important Bible stories that give you an arc of all Scripture. And every week we would break up into little groups in my small group, and the guys would read them, and then they'd prepare to either act them out or tell them, and they'd answer the question for the rest of the group: what does this story tell us about God? Because I just needed them to get some baseline understanding of the stories in Scripture, which really is, the primary thrust of the whole thing. So, yeah, that would be one of mine. It was a jarring moment when I realized that out of 100 kids, I would have expected in all my churches that 10% of the kids wouldn't have known, but in this case, it was 95% didn't know.
I think that's such a good, first of all, it's great content for our show because we exist in that place. But yeah, every youth group, you kind of assume, when you look at a youth group, well, it's got a ratio, there's probably 50% church kids here and then 50% outreach kids or whatever your ratio is. But then, some of these kids know that stuff, but to stand in front of them and be like, nobody? Pick or flick. It is our pick or flick time. It's just a topical, really quick thing, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on each one of these subjects, but I'm going to throw them out there, and MarkO, you have to decide if you're going to pick or flick these subjects, and we're gonna have.
When it comes to snot chunks, I usually pick and flick.
So number one, cell phones at camp.
Flick.
Flick.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been this way back in the day, probably, but I want camp to be, and a mission trip similarly, to be a time when we pull away from the distractions of the world, right? A friend of mine a long time ago in a book, he wrote something about that youth ministry camps are mini monastic experiences. And I always love that metaphorical language, right? That there's this withdrawing, and even just to be present to one another and to have fun, it's going to be way more heightened if we don't have phones. Now, I would say that all the adult leaders get to have them because otherwise parents will freak in our current day and age if there's absolutely no way. And you'll probably still, I know lots of youth workers who have had this rule and kids have not been allowed to come to camp because parents freak. But I still think that is absolutely, I'm pretty strong on that one. Flick.
Yeah, I'm a flick on that one too. I think one of our big strategies, what we call it, what our mission statement for camp is to disconnect to reconnect. And disconnecting and detoxing from technology and the distraction of this world is all about what camp is about. So yes, I think that even in a continual pushing the envelope, what should camp be? I say flick the phone so that they can get to know the people and the surroundings and the God that they are there to get to know. All right, the next one here. The moon landing. We are 50 years from the time in which we celebrate the moon landing, and there's a lot of Gen Zers. There's a lot of students I come across nowadays, MarkO, who don't believe that the moon landing happened. So tell me, did the moon landing happen? You were there. You were there for this, right?
On the moon? I was there.
No, but you were actually alive for this. This is the perfect topic for you,
I definitely remember, when I was a young kid, growing up in Detroit, when those, not the first moon landing, but when some of the other, Apollos were taken off, we would, they'd pull a TV in and we'd watch it live in school. Yeah, it was a big deal.
So are you picking or flicking it?
Oh, I'm totally picking. Yeah. It's absurd to me to think that it would be a flick.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm picking it too. Obviously, the moon landing happened. It is how we won the Cold War. God bless America. And so of course we're not gonna flick that because we love this country. That's good. All right, next one. Weekly summer youth programs. So some youth groups stop during the summer. Traditionally, and some keep on going throughout the summer. Where are you at in this? So it's weekly summer youth program. So this is on the positive. You would do a program throughout the summer.
I'm going to have to break your rules here and do a little bit of a combo thing. And I'm going to say flick the norm and pick something else.
Okay.
Right? So it's not, okay, we're done. It's the end of May. We'll see you in September, right? Other than camp and a mission trip. But it's something other. If you have a small group model, I think it's really healthy to give the small group leaders 3 or 4 months off to have a break. It's critical for retaining them, frankly, that they have some downtime. And I would probably either skip a midweek or a Sunday night program during the summer or replace it with something else. Like my church that I go to now, we have Sunday morning programming that's kind of like a church service for junior hires. And then we had Wednesday nights, we have our life groups. We cancel the life groups for the whole summer. But we still do our Sunday morning thing. So there's opportunities to still be together. The last junior high ministry that I ran, we did a kind of a short season of midweek pool parties, right? So it was still a weekly gathering on probably about half of the weeks of the summer, but it was really low key, mostly just relationship, right? And maybe there was a little mini Devo or something. So I would say flip. I'm going to give you a new word. Instead of pick or flick, summer program calls for a flip.
You got to flip the script. I like that. That's good. All right. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Actually, I'm in the same boat. We change it for the summer. We have different. We have this thing called off-campus August. Every single one of our youth groups or youth ministry programs are off-campus. We go to the park. We go do this giant slip and slide. We go over to these people's houses who's got like this crazy, awesome, amazing house, and we do some jet skiing and tubing and all that stuff. And so yeah, we flip the script too. So I'm with you. I'm also going to flip the script there. So thank you for that, Marco. All right. I'm going to change this last one, and I know I already sent you the show notes. So here it is. This is going to be raw. I'm going to change this. And because I want to talk about this. High school and middle school combined for youth ministry.
Well, I would say that the answer to that, like so many pragmatic questions that you or any other youth worker could ask me, my standard answer is the best response is that which you have collaboratively discerned God is leading you to do. And the second best response is what's right in your context, right? So it's hard to say this is good, this is bad. I would say it's absolutely a contextual question. There are some general guidelines. I think that in general, seventh graders are really different than juniors developmentally, and they're asking different questions. And there are benefits to combining them, but that you can really make the ministry more specific to their needs when you separate them. But there's probably a critical mass threshold where that's possible. So, under about maybe 30 kids or so combined, maybe 25 kids, I'm not sure that I would see a lot of logic to splitting. Maybe you still keep it together for your weekly program, but do a few events or programs that are specific to one or the other, right? And once you start growing a little past that, particularly once you pass about 50 kids combined, there's really, you might still do some things combined, but there's great advantage for the learning and safety, and I don't mean just physical safety, but the opportunity for kids to really feel known and present if you make it a little more age specific. Like even in my church, which is a pretty good sized church, we're not massive, but we run about 2,000 people, and our Wednesday night program has preteen, junior high, and a high school all meeting concurrently with small groups. But we start on Wednesday nights together, all three of those programs together. So we have fifth grade through seniors in high school all in one room for about 10 minutes of worship. And we just found that in our context, that scale just really adds to the purpose of why we're doing it. And then we break up from there back into more age-specific things.
Yeah, your answer is better than mine, but I'm on a hard flick on here. I remember when I first started in youth ministry.
Flicking what?
I'm flicking them combined. I like them separated, and for a lot of the reasons that you talked about actually already. But when I first started in youth ministry, my first youth group, I remember they paid me with a cell phone tower that they put on their property. It was a tiny little church, about 40 people in it. They decided we need a youth pastor, or this whole thing's gonna go under. And so I started in, I remember like, what night's youth group? They're like, we don't have that yet. And here's the collection of kids that we're going to give you for youth group. And it was like 6 kids. And in that context, way back in the day, it was not advantageous to like, okay, you come on a different night and you other 6 come on this night. And so that made sense to me back then. But as soon as we got above, I mean, I was even before you. As soon as we got above 30, as soon as I can get like at least a 10 or 12 kids in a different context, I split it and I split it quick because I think man, you put a senior next to a 6th grader, it's craziness. And I think that's just kind of like a weird.
If I were leading a ministry right now though with 30 kids in it, I mean, I would want to prayerfully discern God's leading, and I would want to know my context. But my guess is I would do a combination of those.
You do combo of those.
Some things, I don't mean combine them all the time. I would do a combination of separate and together.
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, like, I think even in a teaching time, let's say you're in a kind of a pretty prototypical youth ministry setting where there's, a bit of teaching and then there's small groups. Well, I think you can do some master teaching in the big group. Yeah. But when you go to think about how do I apply this to my life, then moving into something that's more, developmentally focused is just going to be way more productive. Like you said, it's really difficult if you've got, 7th graders who need to step up to the maturity of juniors and seniors, which they really can't do. Or if you've got juniors and seniors who need to dumb down, right? At some point, I think at least having small groups that are age-based or roughly age-based is preferable.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I actually, the thing you said about worship and just having the amount of volume that you can put in a room by having everyone together, that sounds like an awesome thing. And I'm thinking about it in my own context, how awesome that would be. Well, this has been a very special episode of the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast. We are part of the Youth Worker Podcast Network. Go check out those other podcasts in there. They are awesome guys. And MarkO, do you got anything else you want to add before we're done?
Thanks for having me on, man. Keep at it. Let me say this. Today, I had 2 phone calls with youth pastors who got fired in the last week.
Oh, my goodness.
And this happens all the time. And because of my work with coaching youth workers, I hear these stories a lot. And, I'm just again reminded this work that we do is some of the most rewarding possible work out there. It's also some of the most misunderstood work. Even our own churches so often don't understand what we're really called to do. And even if their intentions are good, they might not really understand it. So I guess the final word I would maybe leave to listeners is make sure that you are ultimately seeking your affirmation for who you are from God and not from people who don't understand what you're doing.
Wow. I think that's like the first official benediction we've had on the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast. Dropping some wisdom bombs at the end here, man. Woo, that was good. We just buried the lead. That's what we did. We buried the lead. No one's even listening now. And you just bring that out right now, MarkO? Ah, man. All right. Well, we're going to have you back on to talk about some of that stuff because, that's great. But I appreciate you, MarkO. We appreciate your ministry. And I hope some of these, some of our listeners come up and say, hey, I'm at the conference and I'm here because I was listening to you on the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Fringe Youth Worker Podcast.